Okay. Thank you again. Welcome again to St. George Greek Orthodox Church and our 13th annual St. Gregory Palamas Festival of Lights Lenten Retreat. And this year we are pleased to welcome Bobby Maddex, who's speaking to us on film and Orthodox Christianity. This is our third lecture. The first last night was why watch movies and film. The second one we just had this morning was how to watch movies and film. And the third one right now is what to watch, what movies and films to watch. Please excuse my repeated introduction, but for those who will be watching this video online, it will be helpful. Bobby is the senior editor of Salvo magazine, which I showed to you earlier. If you're interested and you want to take a look at Salvo magazine, let me know. They also have a website. Bobby's also the station manager for Ancient Faith Radio. And last night Bobby mentioned that you're getting 380,000 downloads from your Ancient Faith Radio station, which is that's an incredible amount and a testament to the quality of the work that you're doing. Bobby also hosts the Ancient Faith Radio podcast, The Orthodox Moviegoer. He's also a freelance writer and speaker on topics related to faith and culture. He graduated from Wheaton College in 1994 and spent 5 years as senior editor of Gadfly, a national arts and culture publication, and also served 1 year as marketing director for Touchstone magazine. Bobby earned his master's degree in British literature from DePaul University in 2002, and now his wife and their children, 3 daughters and a son, live in Northwest Indiana. So please again help me welcome Bobby Maddex.
Okay, so as we've been doing, we'll take a look at what we have on tap. Another brief lecture. This one kind of in between the one that I gave last night in terms of length and the one that I gave this morning. Then we're going to talk a little bit about this study that I referred to about what watching difficult movies does to your brain. And we'll touch on that very briefly. To address issues of sex and violence in movies. We'll go through some examples of the kind of things not to watch. And then we'll conclude with the movies that you should watch. I have a list of 100 for you. And so I'll highlight a few of them, but I'll give you all the list at that point. And you can take home with you. And then also included there are some film study resources that I've found helpful. Things that have helped me to better understand film and to better watch them. So I will begin with this brief statement. We watch movies to acquire wisdom. And as Orthodox Christians, we know that the only wisdom worth acquiring is that which draws us closer to God. What type of movie, then, is most likely to accomplish both of these goals? To so involve us that we don't just learn from the circumstances that it portrays, but also perhaps progress a bit in our strivings for theosis. First off, the film must exhibit excellence in each of its technical aspects. We talked about that this morning. The screenplay must be fresh and real and true. The acting should make us forget that we are watching performances, should make us forget our situatedness within the theater or our living rooms. The cinematography must be executed in expert fashion, conveying a concrete sense of place, as well as palpable moods that are appropriate to where they appear in the overall story. The editing should be inventive, but never flashy. It should enhance the action rather than detract from it. The soundtrack must do the same, and it should do so subtly, such that we barely register it in its attempts to manipulate us emotionally. I could go on, but you get the point. To qualify as great, a movie must demonstrate the filmmaker's complete mastery over the art form. But mastery is not enough. On the contrary, if the sum of a movie's parts, no matter how flawless each of those parts may be, is merely a replication of the world in all its fallenness, depravity, and decay, it is bad art and unworthy of our time. Madeleine L'Engle put it this way: some artists look at the world around them and see chaos, and instead of discovering cosmos, they reproduce chaos on canvas, and music, and words. She says, as far as I can see, the reproduction of chaos is neither art, nor is it Christian. Barbara Nicolosi states the matter differently, but she means the same thing. A film should also be judged according to its message, she has often told me. What does the movie want you to believe? Is what it's telling you the truth or a lie? If the latter, then it's a bad film, no matter how good the technique may be. Mastery and truth. Without both, a movie's impact will either be negligible or destructive. So what films do such criteria eliminate? Well, you can go ahead and cross out Bella, Facing the Giants, Fireproof, Left Behind, and any other well-meaning Christian or crypto-Christian movie that is packed to the gills with truth, morality, and goodwill, but has the artistic heft of an after-school special. Flannery O'Connor writes that the sorry religious novel comes about when the writer supposes that because of his beliefs, he is somehow dispensed from the obligations to penetrate concrete reality. This is doubly true of religious films. There is nothing worse than a sorry Christian movie, one drenched in sentimentality and preachiness, but as dry as a bone in the creative department. Such are inauthentic recreations of reality, and thus cheap imitations of God's own creative acts. What is good in itself glorifies God because it reflects God, writes O'Connor. I would argue that the reverse is also true. What is not done well artistically, regardless of the intentions behind it, actually does a disservice to God and the furtherance of his kingdom. I agree with L'Engle when she writes that, quote, some of those soppy pictures of Jesus looking like a tubercular, fair-haired, blue-eyed goy are far more secular than a Picasso mother and child. I agree, in other words, that films intent upon forcing Christianity down viewers' throats, as opposed to simply presenting good stories, which by their very nature honor God, and in a way that will draw seekers to him, do just as much damage to the reputation and inherent allure of Christianity as those that condemn Christianity in an outright fashion. And what of films that are technical masterpieces, but that trade in lies? Such whitewashed tombs as Pleasantville, or American Beauty, or $1 Million Baby, to name just a few. Yes, our criteria eliminate these as well, for their embodiment of chaos constitutes an artistic violation in its own right, using the medium to obscure truth, which is the very thing that artists are meant to protect and illuminate. These movies are dangerous because their technical merits disguise the falsehoods that they seek to show. They make sin palatable and should be avoided at all costs. I'd like now to offer a quick word about movie recommendations, since this is the point of this particular session. My opinions will not necessarily reflect yours. In fact, they may be in every way wrong, misguided, and completely out of step with whatever absolute notions of quality exist out there that transcend human subjectivity, and for this I apologize profusely. My favorite film critic is Anthony Lane of The New Yorker. It's not that I always agree with Lane's assessment of contemporary cinema. Indeed, being an urbane aesthete with a penchant for praising movies that champion sexual perversity and moral relativism, he has missed the mark more often than he has hit it. Incidentally, for accurate reviews, I typically turn to Josh Larson of the podcast Film Spotting. I talked about him a bit last night. It's just that Lane is the best of the writers about film that I've ever encountered. And this is evident, I think, by his collection of reviews titled Nobody's Perfect. Someone's come take a look at it later. It's a pretty big book. In the introduction to this aptly named book, Lane states the following: I am always sorry to hear that readers were personally offended, even scandalized, that my opinion of a film diverged from theirs. I wish I could convince them that I am merely starting an argument, as everyone does over dinner or in a crowded bar after going to see a film, and that their freedom to disagree is part of the fun. So feel free to do the same. I think this is a very well put sentiment, and I hope that you approach today's session first and foremost as the beginning of a conversation. All this to say, don't be mad at me. I'm just about as fallen as they come, and nothing that I say should be construed as the last word on the proper Orthodox stance toward the cinema. To be honest, what worries me the most is not that our opinions of quality will differ, but rather that my own personal tolerance level for depictions of the ugliness of our sin-saturated world will grate against yours. Please, by all means, gird yourself against immorality, no matter how much I myself may believe that such is necessary sometimes to arrive at an especially poignant truth that has the potential to aid us on our journeys toward salvation. I want to address, right from the get-go, the ethic I follow when it comes to subjecting myself to on-screen sex, violence, profanity, and other immoral shenanigans. Per usual, I take my cue from Flannery O'Connor, the Christian author who spent a large portion of her writing life exploring just this subject. In her book of essays, Mystery and Manners, she explains that the Christian fiction writer is entirely free to observe. He feels no call to take on the duties of God or to create a new universe. He feels perfectly free to look at the one we already have and to show exactly what he sees. He feels no need to apologize for the ways of God to man or to avoid looking at the ways of man to God. For him, to tidy up reality is certainly to succumb to the sin of pride. Note that O'Connor does not say that the Christian writer is free to ignore the ways of God to man and the ways of man to God. No, these are precisely the things that he must tackle. It's just that he is under no obligation to sanitize reality. So this is where I begin. First off, does the film actively and accurately reflect the real world? And second, does it do so in the service of explaining the ways of God to man and the ways of man to God? In other words, does it make cosmos out of chaos? To these two criteria, I ask only that a movie's content should never make sin attractive. Then again, any film that is seriously interested in truthfully depicting the relationship between God and man would never traffic in the gratuitous or merely titillating anyway. Such are antithetical to the job at hand. I hold secular filmmakers to the same standard. Whether it's his intention or not, if a director manages to conjure up capital T truth, and if part of doing so means showing us the operations and consequences of sin, then I am willing to endure these depictions. The minute I suspect that something more is going on, that the director simply aims to shock or excite, or that he has begun to revel in corruption, I'm out of there. Again, I'm just trying to let you know where I stand on the issue. You may very well believe different, and I would never accuse you of being wrong in this regard. But you should also understand that I'm not going to limit my list of what to watch to squeaky clean G-rated movies, though a number of these will also be represented. Use your own judgment, and please follow your own ethic when deciding whether to watch what I recommend. Believe me, I don't want to offend anyone's sensibilities. Okay, so let's talk a little bit here. Lost my place for a second. Oh yes. Why watch difficult films? Okay, so as I said last night, and I think I mentioned it this morning too, there are two cognitive theorists, David Bordell and Noel Carroll, and they decided to introduce cognitive theory into cinema studies. And what they found is that anytime we encounter something visually, we're trying to make meaning out of it, right? And we grow accustomed throughout our lives to certain schema in that regard, right? What I mean by that is our ways of making sense of the world become habits, and they become ingrained, and they become difficult to change, right? So what this causes is what's called inattentional blindness, right? What this means is you become blind to things that don't fit into the criteria you've already established for yourself. So when viewers reject difficult films, when you go to a movie, not all difficult films, some films are difficult because they're bad, but a difficult film, one that's not easily understood from the outset. The reason why we tend to reject them, or to want to leave, or to want to turn the movie off, or whatever, is because they make us feel like beginners, because the way that the film was made does not fit with our preconceived notions of what a film is. Okay? What these cognitive theorists found, though, and this is like the most fascinating thing, is that by forcing yourself, though, to watch these difficult films, your brain begins to change. And you actually create new capacities in your brain to take on all different kinds of subject matter and different ways of doing things. You watch difficult movies and start to change that part of your brain, you'll probably have an easier time even reading difficult novels. Okay? So, more meaning basically can be unlocked everywhere by watching difficult films. And so the list that I'm going to give you in a little bit is full of difficult films. And not all of them are. Some are quite accessible, and the one that we're going to watch after Vespers today is one of those. No less full of meaning, but a number of these films are very difficult, particularly the ones by Tarkovsky. I talked about Tarkovsky last night. He created a whole new vocabulary for cinema. His movies, he calls it sculpting in time. Right? They're not so much plot-driven or narrative-driven as impressionistic images, right, that are linked together. And but there is so much value in them. And it's worth taking the time to try to understand. Now, about these whitewashed tombs, this, of course, is a quote from Matthew 23:27. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are all like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. So I made my list of the top 10, or I think I just did 9, the top 9 whitewashed tombs. And so I'm going to run through these with you. I basically broke them down. I'll give you a little information about the film. I like to do little fun alliteration things. What the fascination is with the film, why the secular world thinks they're so great, and then the frame of reference, though. What is the lie that the film is based on? Right? And so maybe if you've seen a few of these films, you'll begin to understand what I'm talking about movies that have technical merit, but that are actually morally bankrupt. Okay, so the first one is The Graduate. How many people have seen The Graduate? Okay. And of course, it's directed by Mike Nichols, starring Anne Bancroft, Dustin Hoffman, and Catherine Ross. And the fascination there is immediately apparent, right? Crackling dialogue, some nifty camera shots, Dustin Hoffman's deadpan performance, the Simon and Garfunkel soundtrack, and Anne Bancroft's beauty. Right? It is a very appealing movie. But the frame of reference is really, when you think about it, utter nihilism. Benjamin Braddock, played by Hoffman, moves from one meaningless existence to the next, whether as the son of swanky Beverly Hills parents, the lover of his father's law partner's wife, or the bewildered boyfriend of his father's law partner's daughter. Braddock seeks meaning everywhere, but never finds it, implying that no meaning was there to be found in the first place. And you remember the closing scene, when he comes to the church and bangs at the window, steals his girlfriend from the man that she was about to marry. They get in the car, they're all smiles, and then what happens? Right before the movie closes, their smiles completely disappear. They have no idea what they're doing, right? And their real world feels just as meaningless to them as it was before.
So, there's two things. But do you remember in the church he's swinging the cross?
The cross, yeah.
People, and then secondly, my question would be: was any of that nihilism intentional on Nichols' part? Because that era was really about being lost in many ways.
Yeah, I think it was intentional. I mean, I think that closing scene made it very clear. So you watch the ending again. You probably can find a clip of that on YouTube. It's very, very revealing. Okay, the next film is The Big Chill. And it says it's 2002 there, but that's because that was the reprint. It's directed by Lawrence Kasdan, starring Tom Berenger, Glenn Close, and Jeff Goldblum, a very beloved movie. The fascination, of course, is the outstanding ensemble cast, tons of visual irony, interesting soundtrack of great 60s tunes, and numerous appeals to baby boomer nostalgia. The frame of reference here is The Summer of Love. The movie is full of wistful reminiscences about the sex and drug-soaked culture of the 1960s. The film also suggests that altruism is a fleeting preoccupation of the young, that monetary success is an irresistible lure. And then there are the usual Hollywood swipes at things like stay-at-home mothering and things like that. Oh, this is a really interesting one. Beautiful movie. It's called The Hours. How many people have seen The Hours? Yeah. Directed by Stephen Daldry, starring Nicole Kidman, Julianne Moore, and Meryl Streep. So you have some top-notch actresses there. The fascination, a cleverly interconnected plotline, superb writing, spot-on acting by Streep, Moore, and Kidman, attractive and accurate set pieces, and the truly mesmerizing details of Virginia Woolf's life. The frame of reference here, of course, is hardcore feminism. The film depicts the lives of women as being comprised of nothing but unfulfilled dreams, wifely dissatisfaction, and unachievable perfectionism. Throw in some indications that the answer to this plight is homosexuality, and you've got yourself a fairly devious attack on the traditional family. Okay, Vera Drake. Has anybody seen Vera Drake? Okay. Made in 2004, directed by Mike Leigh, starring Imelda Staunton, Richard Graham, and Eddie Marsan. The fascination here, the winning Granny Plump acting of Stanton, director Lee's meticulous attention to period detail, the film's ostensibly objective take on a hot-button political issue. The frame of reference here, of course, is Roe v. Wade. Don't be fooled, everything in this movie is carefully orchestrated to make abortion appear like a morally benign social service carried out by grandmotherly do-gooders. The truth, of course, is that no matter how much Vera Drake may cluck and coo while she performs her procedures, she's still killing babies. We've mentioned this film several times. Father and I talked about it last night even. $1 Million Baby, 2004, directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman, and Hilary Swank. The fascination, the movie's avoidance of gimmickry, 3 actors at the top of their respective games, the sweaty authenticity of the boxing gym setting, and Freeman's world-weary voiceover narration. As always, that's a selling point for any film, right? The frame of reference, Jack Kevorkian. Eastwood presents one of the most straw situation arguments for euthanasia ever to achieve a Hollywood release. Not only does Swank's boxer become paralyzed after a particularly bad bout, but she loses a limb and then suffers all manner of indignity from her unbelievably cruel and self-absorbed family. Plus, the film takes a few potshots at Catholics. Another Hilary Swank film, Boys Don't Cry. Have you seen this one? 1999, directed by Kimberly Pierce, starring Hilary Swank, Chloe Sevigny, and Peter Sarsgaard. The fascination here, Swank's convincing and vanity-free transformation into a boy. Jim Deno's streamlined cinematography, the story's innate suspense, and the allure of starting over as someone new. The frame of reference here is LGBT activism. The movie portrays Tina Brandon's makeover into Brandon Tina as a heroic gesture, a courageous attempt to finally be who she really is. Conversely, all those offended or troubled by her alteration are depicted as ignorant, small-town hicks who are merely afraid of the unknown. Thelma and Louise, I bet a lot of people have seen this one. Yeah, okay. 1991, directed by Ridley Scott, phenomenal director. Stars Gina Davis, Susan Sarandon, Harvey Keitel. The fascination, this is a quick-witted script, the impressive chemistry between Davis and Sarandon, and cinematographer Adrian Riddle's Biddle's glorious shots of Monument Valley. Frame of reference here again is radical feminism. All of the men, you'll notice, in Director Scott's movie are potential rapists, lecherous cowboys, and annoying boy toys. And the two lead women make quick work of them all, even murdering one and destroying another's truck. They also abandon their significant others, and when faced with the prospect of being punished by an all-male police force, they choose suicide instead. So now you know what I'm talking about with whitewashed tombs, right? So there's the two extremes there, right? I talked earlier in the lecture portion about movies like Fireproof and Bella. I'm not sure if you've heard of these or not. I know you've heard of Left Behind. Movies that are morally fine, right? But they're just horribly made. And on the other hand, you have movies that are masterfully made, but that contain lies. Okay? You want to avoid both of those. A word about sex and violence, and this is not original to me. There is a great screenwriter, Christian screenwriter named Brian Godawa. He wrote the screenplay for End All Wars. Has anybody seen End All Wars? Really good film. Is a prolific writer about film, and he had a great article about his take with sex and violence. First of all, he points out, and this goes along with what Flannery O'Connor was saying, what I was saying, the Bible is R-rated. Right? The realities that it portrays are not sanitary realities. Rape, bestiality, all of these things are depicted. Now, the difference between the Bible doing that and what a lot of these secular filmmakers do is the Bible uses them as exhortations and not exploitation. Right? These are to show us a different way. They are not shown to make those things attractive. So, from my perspective, I don't know if you remember in the 80s, this may have just been a Protestant thing, but there was a trend for a while where there'd be like family movie guides, right? And in there, they would list out, it would say, okay, there's 2 sex scenes, there's 1 act of violence, there are 32 cuss words, and reducing whether a movie is moral or not to those things. But I'm talking about something completely different, right? As long as the sex and the violence are being used to reveal truth, as long as they are not reveling in those things, but getting us to move away from those things, then I really don't have that much of a problem with it. So it all depends on the context of the use of sex and violence. And closely connected to this, yes?
I was going to say, I think a lot of people think of Christian movies as quote-unquote family entertainment, something that's safe for a 6-year-old, and you're talking about cinema in a different context.
Yes, and I do believe, if you have a 6-year-old, there's certain things you're not going to show them. I'm not suggesting that we sit down with our families and watch movies filled with sex and violence, right? I'm just talking about the overall message of the movie, and if I'm watching it by myself, what kind of things bother me and what kind of things do not. Closely tied to this idea of context are consequences. I always want to see, are there consequences to the sin that's going on in the movie? Are the sins rewarded, or are there negative consequences? It's another good indication of whether a movie is a whitewashed tomb or not. And then Brian Godawa talks a little bit about interactive redemption. I'm going to skip that one. Okay. So let's go on to Flannery O'Connor again. And this is Flannery O'Connor's basic stance with regard to violence in her novels. Does everybody know who Flannery O'Connor is? Okay, and she's a a Southern Catholic writer. She wrote the novel Wise Blood. She wrote the novel The Violent Bear It Away. She wrote millions of essays. One book that was called Mystery and Manners. And probably her most famous work is a short story called A Good Man is Hard to Find. And in that story, a family with a very annoying grandmother are driving, and the grandmother is complaining about where they're going, and then, she doesn't like her son-in-law, and they're going the wrong way, and all this kind of stuff. And they get in an automobile accident. And then after the automobile accident, they are discovered by a guy who's essentially a serial killer, right? And so the serial killer begins taking the family one by one into the woods to shoot them. And he finally comes to the very end, and the grandmother, and he's got the gun pointed at the grandmother, and then all of a sudden the grandmother has this revelation, and she tells this guy who's called the misfit, she tells him, I see the face of Christ in you, right? And kind of goes on in this way. Of course, the misfit shoots her anyway, and then tells his buddies, she would have been an all right woman if she had a gun pointed in her face every day. Okay? So I tell that story as a backdrop for this particular quote. I have found that violence is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace. Their heads are so hard that almost nothing else will do the work. This idea that reality is something to which we must be returned at considerable cost is one which is seldom understood by the casual reader. And I would add to that, of course, it's seldom understood by the casual filmgoer as well. One more quote here. This is ALISSA Wilkinson. She was a longtime film critic for Christianity Today, and was asked one time why Christianity Today, because this is of course the Protestant fundamentalist world, why they would ever consider reviewing R-rated films. She says, why do we review R-rated films? Because we want to raise questions, not give answers. Because we want Christians to be some of the most thoughtful conversation partners and culture makers you can find. Because we want to celebrate the excellent and mourn what's bad, even if those two things show up in the same place. And because we want to serve our readers as they love their neighbors. So I hope that gives a pretty good indication, in addition to my little essay there, about where I stand on the sex and violence issue. Okay, so now I want to touch on what to watch. So, Father, maybe you can start passing around my list here of 100 movies, and I'll draw attention to a few of these. Father, also wanted me to mention, we were talking last night about the Academy Awards, and how movies nominated for Academy Awards are not in any way a guarantee that the movie is necessarily good. Do you guys understand how the Academy Awards actually work? Right? Yes, and they are these. First of all, the voters of the Academy Awards are not necessarily well versed in film, right? They are given what are called screeners. They are, if you're a member of the Academy, you are sent the screeners, and so you're not even initially picking what movies to choose from. And very often, these are the only movies they see all year. Then they are heavily lobbied by the film industry, right? The different production companies are constantly trying to talk them into voting for their film, and this is how they arrive at the nominees, and this is ultimately how they arrive at the winner. So as you watch the Academy Awards, if you watch them on Sunday evening, just keep in mind that just because one of these films is up for an Academy Award does not mean it's great. Does not mean it's great. Okay. Yes?
Who are the people that make films? What do you say about
Yeah, well, they're members of the Academy of Motion Pictures. They're very usually wealthy, influential members of Hollywood, and are not, carefully selected by any means. The experts on movies. Okay, so I'm going to touch on a few of these. Look at the whole list at your leisure. I mentioned yesterday the film Andrei Rublev by Andrei Tarkovsky. This is the movie about the great Russian iconographer. It's a beautiful film. It's very long, shot in black and white, and I highly recommend it. It's a very, very spiritual film. One of Tarkovsky's actually easier to follow. It actually does have a narrative, and so that'd be a really good movie to start off with. And I should point out too that this list is not of my origin either. It's kind of my list combined with a list done by Image Journal. Who's heard of Image Journal? Oh man, you gotta check this out. So it's a really good arts journal. It's a Christian arts journal. I believe it's associated with Calvin College. At least that's where they have their Image Awards. And so they put together a list, and these are their top 100, with a few of mine thrown in, spiritual movies. So not the best movies of all times, but the best movies in their opinion, movies that touch on religion and spirituality in some way. I talked last night also about the Decalogue. The Decalogue is a Polish TV series, 10 basically short films, all centered around the same kind of Soviet-era apartment complex and the people that live in there. And each story is roughly based on one of the 10 commandments. It explores the commandment in ways that you would not think of typically. For example, the Decalogue film that was based on "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," right, is about a father and I believe it's a son. I think it's a son, and not a daughter. And the father is just committed to science, loves science, and just believes that science is the only place where truth is located. So he puts his over-reliance on science. Science has become his god. And in so doing, one time he and his son are getting ready to go ice skating, I believe. And so the father tests the ice with all of his scientific instruments to make sure it's thick enough. And then of course it's not, and the boy falls in and drowns. So that's the kind of story that each one of these things are. They're beautifully filmed, and you'll notice throughout them, at some point, a man will pass. Never says anything, but he's in every single one of the films. And so there's a lot of speculation about that being possibly a Christ figure or an angel. It's just a really interesting touch. These are very expertly made, better than most American movies, is this TV series. Has anyone seen Babette's Feast?
Oh yeah, I have.
Yeah, great movie, set in Denmark. Two daughters of a really strict Protestant preacher father who kind of even starts his own like denomination on this island in Denmark, and he has these two beautiful daughters, but he'll never let them marry. Makes them grow up very austerely, and so they go through their whole life like this till the father eventually dies. And so the two girls continue to live in this house, and eventually this woman named Babette comes to their house, offering her services as kind of a cook and a maid. And so for the next 10 to 14 years, she serves them faithfully, serving them the same bland meals that they always eat. Unbeknownst to them, she has sent annually a lottery ticket. I think it's from a friend. And one year, she wins the lottery. And forget how it's a ton of money. And instead of spending it on herself, she offers to make a fabulous French meal for the entire town, and without telling them, you know, that it's her own money. And so they allow her to do this, and it's this real self-sacrificial gift of love on her part, and you know, it just gets really interesting. The exotic ingredients from all over the world start arriving, and the town gets so interested to see what's going to happen. I don't want to, you know, ruin the film for you or anything, but just a great movie. Okay, we watched a scene from Stalker yesterday. You recall it's the movie about the supposed landing of some kind of alien vessel that has imbued this region with some mystical properties, but in order to take advantage of them, to get your wishes granted, you have to be able to know how to negotiate without getting killed to the place of wishes. And so this profession develops stalkers who are expert guides at taking people through these regions. And you never know throughout the film, you know, whether the stalker is a scam artist or whether the things that he's telling them to do are the truth. And there's a lot of parallels there with contemporary religion, and particularly contemporary liturgical style of religion. Okay, has anybody seen Magnolia? Magnolia. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so it's a movie of a bunch of lives that kind of intersect. Beautiful movie about love and our interconnectedness. It's directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Very unusual film in a lot of ways. At one point, all of the characters are filmed singing the same song at the same time. And kind of show how these people are bound together, kind of how we're all bound together. And his father just said, and I'm not going to tell you why, and it ends kind of with a plague of frogs falling from the sky. So I highly recommend that movie as well. It's a little, I mean, in terms of sex in particular, it's a pretty rough one, and pretty rough in terms of language and everything else like that, but I think it's ultimately very rewarding. The Apostle. Has anybody seen The Apostle? Yeah, so that's Robert Duvall, and a man who is a preacher and finds out his wife is having an affair, ends up putting the person she's having an affair with into a coma, and then he has to, and then eventually dies. And so he, gets out of town, kind of remakes himself into a kind of a prophet, and kind of builds up a new congregation. Filmed a lot about forgiveness, a lot about redemption. It's just an excellent movie. It's just a great performance by Robert Duvall. And then I won't tell you too much about Lars and the Real Girl since we're going to be watching it, but another great movie about community and the healing powers of community. I won't get into the plot of that one because we'll watch it later. Into the Wild. Has anybody seen Into the Wild? Yeah. Really interesting movie. I found it very surprising, particularly since it was directed by Sean Penn. Another really a movie that ultimately is about community and our need for people. It's about a young man who's very idealistic, sets off on his own into the wilderness to kind of get away from society, to get away from people, and finds himself out in Alaska and in dire straits as he accidentally eats some poison berries and is getting very sick in this camper van that he has out in the woods. But ends on a very positive note, I think, just in terms of his last words that he writes in his journal, which I won't reveal that either. But do watch that movie. Plus, the soundtrack of that movie is all performed by Eddie Vedder, who is the lead singer of the band Pearl Jam, and but he does it all on his own. And, just some beautiful ukulele guitar work too. And, yeah.
Is that the one that's based on a true story?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I believe the kid's name was. Yeah, that's right. Okay, The Lives of Others. Yeah, another really good film set in East Germany. There's a member of the Stasi, the great, or they'd say is like was the most effective surveillance agency ever in the history of the world, and one of the members of the Stasi is asked to keep tabs on this playwright and his girlfriend, and he does so with ill intent to begin with, but as he watches these people's lives, he begins to change. So as he's spying on them, he's being changed by the relationship that these two share and the way that they behave around each other and the values that they hold. Really good film. 13 Conversations About One Thing. Another really interesting movie. I'd be interested to hear after you watch it what you think the one thing is. It's never mentioned. And it's not immediately obvious, I don't think, and I only have some theories about it myself. But it's another one of those ensemble pieces with a number of different stories going on that eventually all weave back together and all the parts become part of the whole. This one's a little hard to find, but it's very good. It's called The Addiction. And The Addiction is a vampire movie. But the vampires, it becomes very clear that the whole movie is a metaphor for sin and giving into sin. And in fact, a number of theologians are quoted throughout the movie just to kind of tip the hand that that's exactly what this film is about. And it's bloody, but it's filmed in black and white. And so, and I think that was intentional to not draw too much attention to the gore of it. Directed by Abel Ferrara, another really good director. He did Bad Lieutenant. He also did a movie called The Funeral, and they're all kind of rough going, but he's got like a real interesting spiritual side, and has some Christian background and tries to weave in various themes of Christianity into his films. And I don't know, what type of believer that he is, but he does have very interesting things going on in terms of religion and spirituality. And then Paris, Texas. Have you ever seen Paris, Texas? I would just recommend Wim Wenders in general as a great filmmaker who perpetually touches on Christian themes. One of his more famous movies is probably Wings of Desire, which is about an angel who wants to become human because of his love for humans, and because of his love for a woman in particular. Just beautifully shot, very good movie. Paris, Texas, it was written by Sam Shepard, the late Sam Shepard, great playwright, great actor, and it features Harry Dean Stanton, who just recently passed away as well, and a movie about family, about a man who kind of stumbles out of the desert, been gone for 4 years. His brother finds him, and they go on a quest for his daughter and his former wife, or no, the daughter of he and his former wife. All right, I think there's 2 more here. Oh, The Ice Storm. Has anybody seen The Ice Storm? This is with directed by Ang Lee. Sigourney Weaver's in it, Kevin Kline, a number of other great actors. And it is about this town of New Canaan, Connecticut, where both a literal and metaphorical ice storm have settled on this community. And the entire community is kind of plagued by nihilism and by a lack of belief. And it takes the actual ice storm to kind of shake things up and to return at least one family back to their senses. And then mentioned the Iron Giant earlier today, and it's truly the best animated film I've ever seen, and about a friendship between, it's got some E.T. elements to it, but about a friendship between this alien robot that comes to Earth and a young boy. And it's very touching, very good movie about friendship. It's just a nice animated film all the way around, so I recommend that as well. All right, and so the last thing that I want to do is share with you some resources. You'll see that in your resource page. I'll tell you a little bit about these. First of all, the two podcasts. Two podcasts I would recommend for you to listen to learn more about film and how to watch film, and just to find and identify things to watch. The first is Film Spotting, which I talked about several times now. That's filmspotting.net. That is the Adam Kempenaar, Josh Larson podcast, where they discuss once a week. It's an hour-long show. Discuss film, look at past films, and just a really, really well-done show that does not resort to thumbs up, thumbs down. Every film is treated with nuance. Very good. And then there's on Ancient Faith Radio, there is Pop Culture Coffee Hour. This is a relatively recent podcast for us, although I think it's been 2 years now. And it features Stephen Christoforou and Christian Gonzalez, who are both with the GOA Department of Youth and Young Adult Resources, and they spend an hour discussing various cultural artifacts, not just film. They do film a lot. They also do books and books and music and everything else, and they do it with humor and are kind of able to move seamlessly between kind of having some playful banter and then to getting serious about the thing that they're looking at, and then also bringing some excellent Orthodox insights into these discussions. So that is, you can have the Ancient Faith Radio website under podcasts. Two phenomenal documentaries that are basically courses in watching film, courses in the history of film. The first one is called The Story of Film in Odyssey. And it is a massive body of work that takes you through the entire history of film and all the different film movements. I forget how many minutes it ends up being, but it's like 10 hours long, right? So you don't watch that one in one sitting. They've divided it up, I think, into 10 different episodes. But it's just a college course on film and watching film and film techniques and film history in various countries. It's really, really excellent. I learned so much from it. And then the other is A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese through American movies. Martin Scorsese has seen just about everything, and particularly movies made in the United States of America. And so he takes you through them and offers his insights about the films, and it's fascinating. And then books, and I brought a few of these, the ones that I had with me. One is called, I mentioned Brian Ganawa, Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment. And so he touches on a lot of the things that we touched on today about what to watch and what not to watch and how to watch things appropriatly. One book that I did bring is called God, Man, and Hollywood, Politically Incorrect Cinema by Mark Royden-Winchell. And he looks at everything from films like Birth of a Nation, which was a D.W. Griffith film that is much maligned because of its racism. A lot of debate about whether it was an accurate depiction of the time, if it was an accurate reflection of what people believed in society at that time, or whether it was truly racist. But they investigate these types of films all the way up to even like the Last Temptation of Christ and even the Passion of the Christ. So it's a really interesting book. It takes a look at some really fascinating films. And then I mentioned several times now, Movies Are Prayers by Josh Larson. I'm just making my way through the book now. I'm about a quarter of the way through, and it's just excellent. Just looking at the ways that movies express spiritual longing. And then one that, the last two, are not to have anything to do with spirituality or orthodoxy or anything like that, but are just great, primers on film. One is a biographical dictionary of film by David Thompson. This is the 3rd edition, but I believe it's like a 6th edition now. And so basically what you do is you go through, you can look up directors, you can look up actors, you can look up film movements, and these exhaustive, extremely well-written explanations of who these things are, what these things are, who these people are, and what they contribute to the overall world of film. And it's just great if you're getting ready to watch a movie by a new director. You can look up that person's name and find out, even before you get to the film, what makes this guy important, what makes him somebody who is worth listening to. And then equally helpful is David Thompson's How to Watch a Movie, which is about the same size as the Biographical Dictionary of Film, so it goes into so much more detail that I've been able to in these last 3 sessions. So, that's all I got. That's as far as it goes, so I hope that any additional questions. Yes?
Kind of maybe a lot of questions here to see it in a short way. And I think like maybe something that Father Rick was saying before about when you're talking about somebody that like a lot of naturalism with, and how maybe there's an element of like parity there, over focusing on naturalism actually makes you see it for what it is, emptiness, worthless. So the question from that is like, how much does the filmmaker's intention matter in how we should perceive a movie? And then connected question there being, if it doesn't matter, then is it really just what we make of them? Because you seem to be saying that some movies are like bad, don't watch it. Right. But what if you could get something?
Get something out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why I prefaced the whole thing by saying, it's going to be... Yes, okay, so there's 2 things kind of, I think he's saying. One is, does what a director intends matter when you watch a film, right? And the second part is, if it doesn't matter what he intends, isn't it possible that even in movies that one person might find objectionable or bad or morally bankrupt, that someone else might get something good out of it, right? And despite whether the director intended it or not. And I think that's totally possible. Totally possible. And that's why I prefaced what I was saying today by saying, it's going to be different for different people. And people are going to have different tolerances for different things, and different things are going to bother them in different ways. And so you look to ultimately, use your own judgment, and I can't make that determination for you. Yeah. Yes?
Could you address how, I think maybe in the 60s, the past, it got very popular, and even to present day, that it's acceptable to blaspheme the Catholic Church, and we're still mysterious. In Christianity, generally, yes. But even with the Orthodox, we're still mysterious enough that people tend to leave us alone.
Yeah.
But could you address that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think that's just continuing to increase is the hostility toward Christianity. And I think you're right, the Orthodox escape a little bit from that because of its relative obscurity here in the United States. And I think it's just going to keep getting worse. And the Orthodox will, once people discover, that we are true Christianity, right? I mean, I think the hostility will come in that direction as well, if it's not already. It's just in a culture that wants to be able to do, where people want to be able to do whatever they want to do, one enemy of that is a faith and religion that prescribes rules for behavior, and acknowledges the existence of sin and acknowledges the existence of God. It's really unfortunate. Yeah.
So, I'm sure there were, everybody had a few films that were not on your list.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, I was thinking probably many of the films I was thinking of were ones that were more populous in their field and more recent. So I had a list of them, so I'm just going to offer what I think is the best one of the list and ask you to comment on it.
Okay.
What your critique of it is. I think it's one of the best films made, Gladiator.
Oh.
And the way that was aesthetically, cinematically was done, the story it tells, the acting, everything about it. So I would be interested in your view.
Yeah, what's interesting is that was directed as well by Ridley Scott. So you have, Velma and Louise on one hand and Jack Gladiator on the other. Plus a movie that is another movie that is full of interesting moral insights, like Blade Runner. He also directed Blade Runner. And so a very interesting filmmaker. And I like Gladiator quite a bit. And I think it's deserving. And that's probably a good thing to do. Maybe as the weeks go on, is to maybe you'll begin to share each other, your list with each other, and add things to it. Just trying to give some sort of starting place. But, yeah. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on like explicitly religious films that are really good? I'm thinking of maybe Charlton Heston's Ben-Hur in 1959, which I saw it recently, and I thought it was just an excellent movie.
Yeah, no, it's a very good movie, and it's awesome when those two things come together. When a movie that is very outwardly Christian is also very, very good. Yeah, and another one, recent one would be that the film, from what I understand, Ostroff, the Island, is supposed to be excellent. The Island is the English, and the Russian is Ostrov. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah. And so I heard that's very good. So I'm here to watch it, and I think the whole thing is available on YouTube. I don't think that, I think you can watch it there for free. So not to be confused with the Earl McNay film, likewise called The Island. Yes.
Well, I was curious, I can't remember if you have the film Sophie Scholl on here, and was it Sophie Scholl, or was it the White Girls that got nominated for?
I believe it's Sophie Scholl. Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
She's my role.
Oh, really? Fascinating. Very good. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to rest. I don't know if I think I've come down with the flu. And so before we watch our movie together, I'm going to take a little break. So thanks for this
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And just some closing thoughts. Maybe, if you're interested, I think it's always good to have these things kind of driven by let's say, a grassroots movement. But just like we have book clubs, and where you sit down and you talk about books and what's interesting, and what's redeeming about them. Perhaps we could start an Orthodox movie club, or could even be a pan-Orthodox group, and maybe come together periodically to talk about movies and and share those insights, because I think that's one of the things that doesn't happen in our culture as much anymore, is people watch all sorts of movies, but with Netflix and other things, you're watching them in the privacy of your own home, and you're not really dialoguing about them, to learn more about them, and to share your own insights with other people. Perhaps it happens in conversations that you do have, but generally speaking, our culture, our society is much more privatized in its interaction with film, I think, than ever before. Of course, we all know about the cinemas. There's many of them have closed over the last 20 years, and the ones that we do have now in many ways resemble kind of watching film in your own home. So that's just a suggestion to perhaps to think about, and also, as our schedule right now has us meeting, we're ahead of schedule. So I think what we'll do is we'll have Vespers early. So instead of at 3 o'clock, Vespers will be probably at 2:15, 2:20, maybe not quite a half hour from now. That way, it gives us time to clean up. If you have any questions for Bobby that you want to ask him privately, although you'll have to respect his limitations at this point, so don't keep him too long. And then also, we may, depending on how he feels, we may start a little earlier, but we certainly won't start any later than 4 o'clock, our scheduled time to watch the movie. And so you're welcome if you wanted to come to stay with us, or come back. And if you're not able to be with us, so again, we thank you for being here for part of the retreat, this part of the retreat. So why don't we close with a prayer, and then we'll be out of the way. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, faint-heartedness, lust of power, and idle talk, but rather give to me your servant the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love. Yes, O Lord and King, grant me to see my own faults and not to judge my brothers or sisters. For you are holy, always now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Have a good afternoon, and hopefully you can stay with us.
It's okay.